1,000 passengers and crew on board the Costa Concordia that night.
Ci sono già dei cadaveri, Schettino. Avanti!
How a giant modern cruise ship equipped with state-of-the-art steering and navigation ran aground is not clear.
Plates crash. A metal growl climbs to a scream, and the deck tips. Somewhere, a piano warbles out a familiar melody from Titanic, My Heart Will Go On, which is not the vibe anyone ordered tonight.
There were about 100 people in that corridor. People were yelling, there were screams, crying. It was like what you might expect from a film.
Then a voice on the PA says, everything is under control. But the ship tells a different story. At the same time, the Italian Coast Guard screams orders at a captain who is no longer commanding from the bridge.
Sono persone intrappolate a bordo. Adesso vada a bordo, ti cordi di soccorsi da bordo. Ma ti rende conto che è buio e che qua non vediamo? E che vuoi tornare a casa, Schettino?
On today's episode, we'll uncover how a single foolish decision cost the lives of 32 people. What started as a luxurious cruise off the Mediterranean coast became a desperate fight for survival. And for many, one man was to blame: Captain Francesco Schettino.
Captain Schettino speaking for the first time. He's very, very defiant. He's blaming everyone but himself for the crash of the Costa Concordia.
Did the married captain really change course to impress a lover on board? Why was he one of the first to abandon ship while thousands were left on board? Are his claims of accidentally falling into a lifeboat really valid?
He is quoted tonight as telling investigators that with the ship listing to one side, he tripped and fell into a lifeboat.
I was affected by gravity at the very last moment that the ship was capsizing.
And who were the real heroes in this unfortunate tragedy? We'll map out the series of choices that turned a cruise ship into a sinking death trap. And along the way, we'll uncover how thousands of passengers managed to survive and why others sadly didn't make it.
I never seen before Titanic. But we live in a Titanic situation. People fall down, people cut, people destroyed, people dead.
This is the story of Costa Concordia. It's January 13th, 2012. Passengers from around the world board the behemoth Costa Concordia. Picture a floating resort. Casinos, theaters, 4 pools, a spa big enough to get lost in.
You arrive in the entrance hall near the ship, and you are standing in front of this enormous, indescribable, metal thing.
She's approximately 951 feet long, weighing roughly 114,000 tons, and spans 13 levels. Over 3,200 passengers and about 1,000 crew depart the coast of the Italian city of Civitavecchia at 7:18 p.m. They set off on a 7-night cruise tracing the western Mediterranean coast. It's early winter with clear skies and a light wind. A perfect evening for postcard sunsets and late-night entertainment. At the helm is Captain Francesco Schettino, confident, camera-ready, and fond of sail-by salutes, a move where the ship skims the coast for a dramatic pass. I had the chance to chat with Vincent Etienne. His experience as a navigation officer has shed light on everything I wanted or didn't want to know about cruise ships.
The sail by salute is a very silly tradition among cruise ships. There is something glamorous about a cruise ship. It is quite a big ship and it is very well decorated, very impressive to look at. It can be a bit pretentious at some point. And so that's where the sail by salute comes from, because to the ports where they don't stop, they still want people to be aware of their presence. So that's when they use the foghorn to say, hey, look at us, we're here. We are this amazing cruise ship. You can have a look at us from your house. So that's where the tradition comes from. As for if it is legal or not, no, it absolutely is not.
Months ago, the 51-year-old attempted a daylight version, farther offshore with the company in the loop. Tonight, it's dark. The shore isn't well lit, and the Costa Concordia is pushing around 15 to 16 knots near the coast. And he's not alone on the bridge. A Moldovan dancer, Domnica Tremorton, joins him after dinner. She's not a paying passenger. She'd later admit in court, when you are someone's lover, no one asks you for a ticket.
I tried to hide for 2 years from my life because this is my private life and I have a baby, and this was necessary for me to hide.
Their love story was more iceberg of bad choices than a Jack and Rose romance, and it was about to be cemented in history for all the wrong reasons.
Welcome to Giglio, Italy. It was exactly 1 week ago at 9:30 at night that approximately 4,200 people lived through their own Poseidon adventure when their cruise ship hit the rocks.
At about 9:39 p.m. Central European Time, Captain Francesco Schettino steps back onto the bridge of the Costa Concordia and takes over. The ship's sophisticated autopilot is switched to manual steering. He wants a close pass of Giglio. Now. Orders come fast. Ease her toward the island, then swing her away. The shoreline is dark, and easterly winds around 17 knots are stirring the sea. Schettino calls for a hard turn to port to clear the rocks. The Indonesian helmsman, Jacob Rusli Bean, hesitates and turns in the wrong direction.
Captain Schettino did give numerous orders. Some of them were misunderstood by the helmsman.
I have read multiple maritime incident reports, and I can safely say that it never comes from one big mistake. It's always a combination of multiple small mistakes. What I think would be the biggest mistake of it all is the fact that they had a passage plan. Just follow it.
13 seconds slip by before they correct course. Later in court, Admiral Giuseppe Cavodragone notes it wouldn't have mattered. The order was too late for a ship this large at that speed. This wasn't one misheard command. It was a decision chain that put a skyscraper ship cheek to cheek with rocks at night. At 9:45 p.m., the ship cuts across rocks near La Scole by Giglio Island, tearing a 174-foot gash in the hull. Immediately, the machinery space floods, knocking out power and leaving the Concordia gliding on momentum. Inside, lights flicker, plates shatter, and the ship tilts.
We felt a huge blow. It was so powerful that it even lifted up the television. I have been working on ships for more than 10 years, but I have never felt anything like that.
The ground beneath us was shaking and this moaning was going on. Everything around us was smashing to the ground.
A couple who were enjoying the evening's show with Martin the Magician are baffled by the abrupt shift in the performance.
It was about 15 minutes into the show that we felt this crash and shuddering. At first, we thought it was part of the show.
What is the first explanation passengers hear? Electrical failure.
An electrical fault with one of the generators, but the situation is under control and our technicians are aiming to rectify the situation at this time.
But there's no mayday. In fact, the first alert doesn't come from the bridge. Someone on shore reports the impact. Just after 10 p.m., the Italian Coast Guard calls the Concordia.
Essentially, the main role of the Coast Guard is to answer a crisis situation on its territorial water. So let's say, for example, an oil spill, someone who fell overboard, a ship sinking, a flood. These are the situations where the Coast Guard has been trained to answer.
Roughly 20 minutes pass before Captain Schettino admits the truth. At 10:12 p.m., the Coast Guard calls again.
Buonasera, Costa Concordia. Cortesemente, avete dei problemi a bordo voi? Abbiamo un blackout a bordo e stiamo verificando le condizioni.
At 10:26, Schettino requests a tugboat and notes flooding through a portside opening, a detail that suggests there is escalating damage. While that is underway, some passengers are told to return to their cabins. Mixed messages spread through dark corridors while the deck angle creeps higher.
There's water coming on board, so I thought I just want to get to the surface. But that was chaotic in the hallways.
Authorities log formal alerts at 10:42 p.m., and a rescue operation begins to scale up.
When you're dealing with a crisis situation, you need three things: information, information, and even more information. And your primary source of information should come from the captain. Dealing with such a massive crisis without the proper information is ridiculously challenging.
At 10:50, the order finally comes. Abandon ship. By now, the Concordia is a tilted maze. Stairways become ramps, doors become traps, lifeboats fight the hull. Minutes lost become physics you can't bargain with.
We finally got to our cabin, and that's when we realized that it was very serious. It was dark. A steward came over to us because the key card wasn't working and told us, take your coat, take your life jacket. And then he said to my husband, don't forget your medicine.
Survival tips for those first crucial minutes. Head straight to your muster station. That's the ship's designated assembly point where passengers gather for safety instructions and evacuation if needed. Use the nearest life jacket and don't shop for a better one. Keep your hands free. Move up and out to open decks. As the list increases, interior corridors become chutes for water and debris. In case you're not familiar, list or listing in naval speak means the ship is tilting to one side. Most of the passengers gather on deck 4, where the lifeboats are. However, a handful are instructed to report to the wrong muster point.
It is legally required to have a safety drill every month when you're on a ship. So every month you need to practice a situation where you need to evacuate the ship. In the case of a cruise ship, it needs to be done on the first 24 hours after departure. In this case, they didn't do it.
We went to deck 4 because we knew that was where the lifeboats were. It was while we were standing there that we noticed we had a letter B on our life jackets, yet we were standing at muster station A.
There was no command, no instruction. The officers were not there, but rather it was the people from the kitchen, the restaurant, the maids, or the men who worked in room service.
To have the entirety of the chain of command abandoning their position, that is quite severe. And again, it shows that in a crisis situation, you need leadership.
If you're into accurate, high-stakes survival breakdowns like this, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, what happens next? Around 11 p.m., the Concordia grounds near Punta Gabbianara, just outside Giglio's harbor. Giglio's deputy mayor, Mario Pellegrini, boards the stricken ship to help coordinate passengers getting to lifeboats. He heads to the bridge, but the captain is nowhere to be found.
I hurried here to the port, which is 10 minutes away from where I live on the other side of the island, and I was amazed to see this huge ship, which was tilting 10 to 20 degrees there on the rocks.
The ship continues to list even further. Some reports later place it at about 60 to 70 degrees. Lifeboats on the high side hang like ornaments, while on the low side, they slam, snag, or can't clear the hull. One jams and crashes back into the ship while being lowered. It's chaos.
You could hear people screaming, you could hear people falling inside it. Crew members on the ship watching this were screaming, stop, stop, stop lowering the boat. But they lowered it far too far and it broke away from the side of the ship and swang and clanged back into the ship.
As the ship tilts further, elderly passengers and kids need 2 hands for every step. Rope ladders and flexible boarding ladders unroll down the hull, and for a time, people are walking along the ship's side to reach the rescue craft.
Someone shouted, come on guys, you need to get off now. So the ship is now listing at 45 degrees. The wall and the floor are at this angle, so you're walking at the bottom of a V.
There were 6 or 7 members of the crew that had made a human chain so that we could get up the corridor. And you grabbed a hold of each of their shirts to pull yourself up.
Panic comes in waves, like a crowd bottleneck multiplied by 4,000 and doused in seawater. In the confusion, people start jumping. The water is cold, roughly 50 to 54 degrees. Those who can, make the swim.
We just started jumping, and there were 200 people that jumped and swam 100 meters to rocks, and we got up on the shore.
Others are pulled onto boats by nearby islanders and local divers.
The number one cause of people losing their lives at sea is hypothermia. If you fall in the water, don't try to swim. Use the fetal position. just to preserve your heat as much as possible.
Were it not for the kindness of the citizens of Giglio, many would have perished. One pair made 6 rescue runs. They saved numerous lives, including passengers with advanced hypothermia. There was courage in the chaos, and tragedy too. Giuseppe Girolamo, a 30-year-old musician, gave up his seat in a lifeboat and didn't survive. 5-year-old Diana Arlotti and her father, William, tried other routes as the ship twisted. They never made it out. Prosecutors later detailed their last movements like a map with no exits. On shore, Giglio, a tiny island with barely 1,000 people in winter, goes full bucket brigade. Churches, halls, and homes open their doors immediately. At 12:18 a.m., the Concordia turns over completely. Thousands of tons of water surge into the ship and break windows. For many of the passengers still trapped on the sinking side, this would be their final moment. What were once hallways became more like elevator shafts. Deputy Mayor Pellegrini does everything he can to help passengers trapped at the bottom.
You always need someone to rise to the occasion and try to take the lead.
There were about 100 people in that corridor. People were yelling, there were screams, crying. It was like what you might expect from a film. That's how it was in that moment.
Pellegrini and a doctor toil endlessly to pull people out of the darkness and up shaky rope ladders. But things got a little tense.
100 people were massed at the bottom of that step ladder. The scene was quite violent. There was no more chivalry. The idea that elderly and children should go first had disappeared.
Sometime after midnight, Schettino leaves the ship. He later claims he fell into a lifeboat due to the deck angle. On the radio, Captain Gregorio De Falco of the Italian Coast Guard is having none of it.
Senta, io sono De Falco da Livorno, parlo col comandante? Col comandante Schettino, comandante. Ascolti Schettino, sono persone intrappolate a bordo, adesso lei va con la sua chaloupe e va a bordo della nave. In questo momento la nave è inclinata. Lei si sta rifiutando di andare a bordo, comandante? No, non mi sto rifiutando. Lei vada a bordo, è un ordine, adesso comando io. Lei vada a bordo. Ci sono già dei cadaveri, Schettino, avanti!
The exchange becomes infamous. T-shirts in Italy print the line, "Vada a bordo cazzo," meaning, get back on board for f***'s sake.
When the audio tape was released of the Port Authority of Livorno telling Captain Schettino to get the blank back on the ship, Schettino became, for Italians, a national embarrassment.
I heard a lot of crazy stories about that. Like I heard apparently he changed suits. He removed his uniform before falling into the lifeboat. Apparently his second in command was next to him, also fall into it. Conveniently, they both had a life jacket with them as they fell. The question needs to be asked, like, what were you doing near the lifeboats? First of all, like, why weren't you on the bridge? That's the first one. And second of all, I know how lifeboats are made. You don't fall into a lifeboat. There is quite a margin, like the door is very narrow, and you actually need to give a little swing before you can actually get in. The idea of just conveniently falling into the lifeboat seems absolutely ridiculous to me.
Dozens of patrol and rescue boats crowd the water. Merchant ships, tugs, and helicopters arrive. By morning, more than 4,000 people are off the ship and on Giglio. The final toll is 32 dead. Divers even pulled 3 more survivors out the next day, including crew member Manrico Giampedroni, who was stuck in a lower section. His leg was broken and wedged, his head barely above water. After 28 hours trapped, he was losing hope, but the rescue teams never did.
At last, they suddenly appeared. The great Francesco came with his team.
He had a smile on his face from the moment he saw us.
The first thing that Francesco told me was, "Don't worry, you..." Excuse me. Even after 10 years, it's still emotional.
When tilt gets ugly, move laterally to rafts, slides, or ladders. Follow the crew to alternative exit points. Keep moving through choke points. Never use elevators. If you end up in the water, minimize swim time to prevent hypothermia, keep breathing, and try to huddle with others for warmth.
try to stay on the bridge, try to stay warm, avoid being in a confined space, like for example your cabin or the engine room. Stay in a clear space where you're sure that you won't be trapped by the flood. The last advice I would give is to follow the chain of command, but in this situation, well, there were none, so.
But it can get worse. Once a ship starts to capsize, it can turn into a trap. Water rushes in and people could end up in tiny air pockets. Heavy furniture and even lifeboats become crushing hazards. Live wires in the water mean electrocution risk. And hallways? They can tilt into near vertical chutes. As Mario Pellegrini put it,
when the ship capsized, these became vertical shafts. We opened the trap door and saw the people at the bottom. The water was rising and many were already in a state of panic.
In situations like these, you want to be prepared. Get familiar with the ship's emergency exits and evacuation routes. Find the lifeboats closest to your cabin and make sure you know where to find a life jacket. Have a waterproof evacuation bag ready with drinking water, rations, first aid kit, and a mirror for signaling. If you happen to find yourself in the ocean without a life jacket, find an item to keep you afloat and help you conserve energy and keep warm. If you've seen Titanic, well, this tip is pretty obvious. If you're wearing pants, here's a trick. Take them off, tie knots at the bottom of each leg, hold your pants up, and quickly pull them into the water to collect air. Now you've made yourself a makeshift floating device. Some passengers aboard the Costa Concordia managed to survive out of sheer will and determination. Luckily for a honeymooning Korean couple, a rescue crew heard their cries after being trapped in their cabin in complete darkness for almost 30 hours. Believe it or not, they had slept through the initial crash and woke up in shock to a tilted ship. At 6:14 a.m. on January 14th, Livorno Coast Guard logs record the primary evacuation as complete. Concordia lies on her side on an underwater shelf. At sunrise, sirens fade. A new fight begins. Courts, cranes, and $1 billion reckoning.
The massive wreck of the Costa Concordia lay beached off the Mediterranean island of Giglio. The dramatic sight of epic rescues, grim recoveries, and the largest ship salvage ever undertaken.
By morning, Giglio is a triage island. Churches and halls become shelters. Islanders wrap shivering strangers, brew coffee, and pass out clothes. The town absorbs a floating city overnight and continues to do so for weeks. It was no caped hero who saved the day. It was ferry skippers turning back into the dark, rescue crews and divers risking their lives, and ship staff staying on slanting decks to form human chains. While the hull groaned, they held the line. Ordinary people doing extraordinary work until the last person was off. Then comes the environmental race. The wreck is perched on a ledge. One slip could rip open fuel tanks. By March 2012, crews pumped out around 2,400 tons of heavy fuel oil.
To pump the oil, we use a system called hot tapping.
The circular saw cuts into the hull. The flange is sealed. Pipes are attached. Now oil can be pumped out.
With pollution risk reduced, engineers tackle the impossible-looking part. Removing the wreckage of a 114,000-ton ship. In September 2013, a 19-hour procedure rotated the Concordia upright with winches, cables, and buoyancy tanks. It became the largest maritime salvage operation in history.
The need to protect the environment requires the ship to be kept intact, stabilized, and held back, and embraced by steel cables. Then the ship will be righted, refloated, and then moved, taken away to another place.
In 2014, tugs hauled the ship to Genoa. By 2017, she was cut apart for scrap. The total bill comes to nearly $2 billion, more than triple Concordia's construction cost. In 2013, 5 Concordia crew members, including crisis coordinator Roberto Ferrarini, cabin service director Manrico Giampadroni, first officer Ciro Ambrosio, third officer Silvia Coronica, and helmsman Jacob Roosley Bean, pleaded guilty to charges that included manslaughter, negligence, and causing a wreck. Their sentences were largely shortened or suspended. Then came the trial of Captain Schettino.
It was held in the small town of Grosseto in a theater. which seemed perfect at the time on some level because it was a little bit of a show trial.
In 2015, he was convicted of manslaughter, causing a shipwreck, abandoning ship, and lying to authorities.
I cannot feel responsible. Of course, I feel sad for that, but it's something that I can deal with because I know that it's not the truth.
As far as falling into the lifeboat, it's heavily disputed. In his own words,
I was affected by gravity at the very last moment that the ship was capsizing on the starboard side. I have witnesses that I was forced to go out of the ship together with the second in command.
If he was actually focused on managing the situation, again, he should have been on the bridge. What was he doing near the lifeboat? Like, he's completely useless there.
Alla pena complessiva di anni 16 di reclusione e mesi 1 di arresto.
Appeals fail, Italy's Supreme Court upholds the verdict, and he begins serving time. Costa Concordia, a subsidiary of Carnival Corporation, avoids a full criminal trial by accepting an administrative plea bargain and paying a €1 million fine, which is roughly 1.3 million US. Costa also paid about €84 million, or 112 million USD, in compensation to passengers, crew, and the families of the deceased. For the record, in moments where abandoning ship is needed, the captain is obligated to stay on the ship, give clear evacuation orders, and only leave after everyone is accounted for.
Legally speaking, the captain has to stay on the bridge until everybody else has been evacuated.
If you've had any cruise ship nightmares yourself, let us know in the comments. In the years that followed, Giglio held together. Engineers lifted a sunken city back to the surface, and courts slowly untangled accountability. The facts remain though. 32 people never came home. Incidents like this are rare, yet when leadership wobbles, minor errors stack fast. Which brings us to the bigger picture. How safe are you on a cruise ship?
I'm gonna tell you right away, I am not a huge fan of cruise ships at all. Because first of all, I don't think they're built in a safe way. They mostly focus on comfort than safety. The captain has been incredibly irresponsible, and the personnel was ill-equipped to answer this situation, and the cruise ship wasn't safe.
Estimates in the pre-pandemic era put cruise death odds around 1 in 6.25 million, and man overboard cases numbered in the dozens per year. But rarity doesn't protect you when failures occur. Following Concordia, the industry and regulators tightened safety standards. In 2012, the Cruise Lines International Association required mandatory musters before a ship leaves port. Later, policies on passage planning, bridge access limits, and carrying additional life jackets near embarkation points were added. Following that, the International Maritime Organization strengthened evacuation and damage stability guidance for passenger ships. The wreck became a hard lesson and a baseline for how cruise ship safety is enforced and practiced today.
I'm glad to see how the industry as a whole is evolving based on that and the lessons that can be learned. And more I see the maritime world focusing more on safety. And again, that is something, as a Coast Guard officer, that is something very pleased to see.
If you want another deep dive into how a chain of small decisions can become large disasters, don't miss our episode on the 1981 Hyatt Regency walkway collapse, where minor lapses added up to the deadliest US structural failure before 9/11. Until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep watching How to Survive.